As a big fan of bikes that are both capable and versatile, the Hardtail mountain bike is something I naturally gravitate towards. While these bikes were already great at handling a wide variety of terrain, from single track to dirt roads, the popularity of bike packing has taken it to another level in recent years. One great example of this is the Soma Juice, a steel frame 29er designed for your local XC trails, bike packing adventures, and just general exploring. It's a bike that's been around for nearly 20 years in one form or another, with the latest version being released this year. Although it's normally sold as just a frame, Soma sent me a built-up version of the Juice a couple of months ago, and in this video I'm going to tell you what I think about it after putting it to the test. So let's get into it. The most recent version of the Juice saw some slight but significant changes to make it fit into the modern mountain bike world. First off, the frame stepped up to the ubiquitous Boost axle standard. While that's something that most people won't notice while riding, it's definitely a welcome change when it comes time to replace busted hubs or upgrade your wheel set. The second change was the addition of some extra bosses to the frame, which really ups the ability to take the bike on extended bike packing adventures. You now get top tube bosses, a 3-pack and bottle mount on the down tube, and rear rack mounts with an additional bottle mount on the seat tube on the large and extra large frames. The medium and small, unfortunately, don't get that extra bottle mount because it caused some problems with any decent sized dropper post, but honestly, it's probably worth the sacrifice for that longer length. The final change to note is to the geometry. The Juice isn't and has never been a particularly aggressive hardtail when it comes to geometry. But as Soma says on their website, not everybody wants or needs a bike optimized for descending black diamond trails. Even the updated geometry reflects that. Based around a 100mm fork at sag, the bike has a 68.4 degree head tube, 74.3 degree seat tube, 61mm of bottom bracket drop, chainstays adjustable from 437 to 452, and in a size large has a reach of 465 and a stack of 615. While more progressive than the previous generation, it's still very much in old school territory. But as I'll get into in a minute, that's not really a bad thing. The last thing I really want to note about this bike is the tire clearance. The bike is designed around a 29 by 2.4 inch tire, but has clearance for a 2.6 as well, or if you're a fan of plus tires, it'll also clear a 27.5 by 2.8. One of the most important things to keep in mind when you look at a bike on paper is, what is this bike designed for, and does that design fit with what and how I ride? As I mentioned, Soma wanted this bike to be really good at flowy trails, single track, and long days exploring and bike packing. All good use cases for the geometry this bike has. Southwest Montana, where I live, has a surprisingly great variety of trails, many of which are smooth single track that goes on for miles. I found the Juice to be great in those situations. It was easy to handle on the climbs, and it ate up tight switchbacks on both the way up and down. It felt at home when things were twisty and flowy, and it has a lot more nimble ride feel than you get on something with a longer front end or a slacker head tube. If you're used to bikes like that, there's a good chance you've changed up your riding technique to match, and this might feel a little twitchy or nervous at first. It took some getting used to, but after a couple of rides, I had it all figured out, and I think Soma did a great job of aligning the design with the intended use case. The frame also has a really nice ride quality to it, which I'd say is mostly from the Tongay steel tubing. It's hard to describe, but it feels smooth and supple, and maybe refined would be the best word for it. Whether or not that's something you'll notice is going to depend on your personal experience with steel frames though. All of that said, I also live near a high desert network of trails with rock slabs, drops, and awkward, janky, steep descents littered with rocks and torn up by motos. I might not put the most amount of miles in here, but it's my go-to area when I don't have a ton of time, and happens to be where I do all of my first rides on the bikes I get in for review. To be honest, the Juice was a bit out of its league here. As soon as things got steep and technical, like on a rock roll, I'd get that over the bars feeling that makes you lose all confidence in what you're doing. The nimble steering I loved so much on those flow trails also started to feel more nervous as speeds picked up and rocks became more common. It's still more than capable of tackling those sections with the right skills and speed, but don't expect to set any PRs. Unless, of course, you take advantage of Soma's mention that it will handle 120mm forks great too. Soma sent me the bike with a RockShox Reba with 100mm of travel. Now, I'm no component snob. I rarely feel like something is so bad I need to upgrade, but needless to say, the Reba and I didn't get along all that well. It just felt a bit dead and stiff to me, no matter how I adjusted things. Luckily, I was already planning on trying it with a longer fork, and Ren ended up sending me their 110mm boost fork, which I swapped on after I felt I had done enough testing with the shorter fork. I've ridden a Ren fork on my fat bike for a couple of years now and love the ride feel, so I was excited to try out this narrower mountain bike version too. One thing to note, while it's technically a 110 travel fork, it has a 530mm axle to crown measurement, which is more or less what you find on 120mm forks. With this longer fork on, the head tube slackens to 67.3 degrees, the seat tube goes back to 73.2, the bottom bracket comes up about a centimeter, and the reach shortens down to 453 with a 624 stack. You may not like the idea of some of those at first glance, but boy did it make for a much more confident ride on these spicier trails. I was a little worried, for example, that the bottom bracket drop being in the low 50s would make for a super on top of the bike feeling and negate the benefits of the slacker front end. That wasn't the case though, and it felt like a different bike from the very first ride. Now, some of this was definitely due to the upgrade in fork performance. It's a lot easier to charge into a rock garden or down a rock roll with a supple fork than one that feels like a pogo stick. But a lot of the change was really from the difference in geometry. As I've said before, a head tube angle right around 67 degrees, paired of course with the right numbers on the rest of the bike, is my favorite, as it's slack enough for the steep stuff without making flatter terrain super boring and annoying to ride on. Adding in that taller stack, the over the bar feeling was gone, which made me a lot more confident when heading into steep obstacles. The increased trail from the slacker head tube also made for a more stable steering experience at high speeds, and the bike in general just felt more capable of handling rowdier trails. It was like riding a whole different bike altogether, and based on the trails I ride most frequently, a 120mm fork would be how I'd set the bike up for myself. The Juice is a classic steel hardtail that's been around for a long time, and I think this latest version is a great modernization of it. While I personally enjoyed it with a longer fork, taking it a little more progressive than Soma's design, I think this only proves how versatile of a platform the bike is. The 120mm setup made for a surprisingly capable hardtail that felt at home on blue and even black trails, but still comfy enough for putting down some serious mileage. The 100mm setup is perfect for someone riding a lot of flowy green and blue trails without a ton of steep descents, or for bikepacking trips when you want the steering to be a little more nimble while you're loaded. I also think it's a perfect frame for throwing on some alt bars and fast rolling tires and using it as like a monster of an all-terrain bike. Taking that a step further, you could also swap out the suspension for a rigid fork and maybe throw on a front derailleur for extra efficiency and gear range. Thanks to some rough shipping, I also got in a couple of single speed rides, which proved the sliding dropouts have plenty of range to make that setup nice and easy. The point is, the Juice has the kind of geometry that isn't so extreme either direction that it can be transformed to excel at a lot of different things. And at $700, it's a great deal for a quality steel frame from a reputable brand. So if you're looking for a hardtail that leans into versatility, adventure, and has a bit of a classic feel to it, the new Juice should be on your shortlist. I want to say thanks to Soma for sending this bike out. It's not something they do all that often, especially as a complete bike, so I really appreciate the work on their part. If you want to know more about this bike, go check out their website, which I've linked down in the description. If you want to pick my brain on anything else about this bike, or anything else really, just leave a comment down below. And finally, if you want to support this self-funded adventure I'm on, be sure to subscribe and consider buying some stickers, which are linked down in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.